Yes.
All right. Great. Kalamu, should we go ahead and start?
Fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, we're ready to roll now. Yeah. Here, do you want to send the outfit?
Yeah.
Sure. Vera's going to speak in just 1 second. Kalamu.
All right.
Where am I?
Right here.
This is the.
Okay. All right. You stay right there. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, both live and those who patiently waited for our virtual setup to be set up. We are so honored to have Baba Kalamu Salaam with us this evening. We have his new book of haikus, Precise Tenderness, which he will be reading and discussing with author T.R. Johnson. And we also have Brother T.R.'s book available. And we're just so glad that you're here. We're kicking off, almost ending up National Poetry Month. Kalamu, a native of New Orleans, a teacher, a mentor to many. But without further, we'll have a discussion later. Everybody, for the most part, who is tuned in and who is here has a pretty good idea who Kalamu is. So let's get this reading on the road. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vera. And yes, indeed. Thank you, Vera, so much. And thank you, Jennifer. Thank all of you guys for being here. Thanks to everybody who's streaming from out there somewhere else. And above all, thank you, Kalamu, for talking with me and with all of us about your work, especially the brand new book, A Precise Tenderness. By way of very brief introduction, I'll just say what most of you probably already know anyway. For more than a half century, Kalamu Salaam has been wholly consumed with the work of a literary artist, a political activist, culture bearer, and an educator. Future generations will study his life and his work in university seminars. In fact, that's already started, I'm sure. He is a primary figure in the history of New Orleans in the post-World War II era. As a leader of the Black arts movement here in the South, especially in the global hub that is New Orleans, he long ago became a cultural hero and has taken his place in the long history of the struggle for racial justice in the United States. It is a great personal honor for me to be in conversation with him as we celebrate the launch of his new book, A Precise Tenderness. Yeah, I'll talk for a little bit and then maybe do some readings as well of work. And then, of course, questions from the audience will be welcome. So excited to have this going on, Kalamu. Kalamu, you and I were speaking a little while back, and you had mentioned, and I know you've written about this too, about your, as a very young fellow, your discovery of Langston Hughes and what that meant to you. You had been getting interested in photography, had been taking pictures, but a teacher played sort of a recording of Langston Hughes, and that was, in many ways, a beginning for you. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? Tell that story to these folks?
Sure. What happened was, let me switch to the vernacular. What had happened was I was a child, a son of a school teacher, Inola Copeland Ferdinand. She was the daughter of a local minister, Noah Copeland, in the lower Ninth Ward. And my father had been active in World War II in the Korean conflict and came back. When he came back to New Orleans after that, he married my mother, and subsequent to that, I was produced. And I was born March 24th, 1947. I grew up in the lower Ninth Ward, but I went to school wherever my mother was teaching. one of the, initially it was Fisk, way uptown off of what was then Jeff Davis, and Tulane, not too far from the Marita Bakery. Then my mother was transferred to Wheatley School, Phyllis Wheatley, located around the corner from Dookie Chase. And then when I graduated from Phyllis Wheatley in 6th grade, I was scheduled to follow my mother again. She had been, she was in the process of being reassigned. But what happened was I had suffered appendicitis. And so instead of spending time the rest of my school year at McCarty School in the lower Ninth Ward, I was sent to the hospital, had an operation, and by the time I got out of the operation, I had received the permission to go to school at Rivers Frederick Junior High School, located in the 7th Ward. That I'm saying all of this for people that are not familiar with the school system of that time period. You had to have, the schools were very much district schools. Where you lived determined what school you went to. My mother's sister, Naomi Foy, was working at Rivers Frederick. They were able to get the special permit for me to attend Rivers Frederick, which was considered one of the better junior high schools of that period. And my attendance in junior high school was the pivotal part of my life as far as education goes. In 7th grade, I entered Rivers Frederick, and the industrial arts teacher was Mr. Conrad. He had taken an industrial arts closet and turned it into a dark room, and he taught photography after school. So at 3:15, some of us would go back over to the industrial arts room and learn photography. My first camera was a Yashica twin lens reflex using 120 film. He taught us how to do everything in terms of photography, including developing the film by hand in the trays, manually, and what have you. In 8th grade at Rivers Frederick, my teacher was Mrs. O.E. Nelson. One day she said, "Put your books away, I want you to hear something." I was glad to do it because I loved to read, but I didn't like school. And when she said that, I put my books under the desk and I'm sitting there and waiting to find out what she wanted us to hear. And she had a little small portable record player and put on a recording of Langston Hughes reciting his poetry to a jazz band. The last line of the poem that really affected me was, "A poor man ain't got no business to die." When I heard that, this was a poem about a woman whose husband had died suddenly. They lived in Harlem, and they were so poor she couldn't afford to bury him. So she went around Harlem begging for money in order to bury her husband. And that's why the last line was, "A poor man ain't got no business to die." Well, I went to the main library, which is located where it is now, right at school. When the school bell, the end of school, the school bell rang, I went straight to the library. Told the librarian I want a book of Langston Hughes poetry because I wanted to find that poem. The librarian told me where to go. When I turned the corner to the area she indicated where it would be, I expected to see, one or two, maybe three books by Langston Hughes. I was ignorant. I didn't know any better. And when I looked up, it was a shelf full of books. A shelf, and I said, whoa, I guess this must be what it's like to be a writer. So Langston Hughes wrote two autobiographies, The Big C and I Wonder as I Wander, along with plays and short stories and poetry and bibliographies. I mean, just it went on and on. And so what happened was I was so infatuated with Langston Hughes, I read his autobiographies, and every person that he mentioned, I'd go back to the library and look for that person, their work. That if I found it, I would pull the book off the shelf and scan it right quickly. And if something caught my eye or I liked it, I would check it out. If not, I just put it back on the shelf. So in a way, Langston Hughes was my graduate education in terms of writing. That's how I got started in literature in the 8th grade.
That's so interesting, and it's such a powerful story. I know, Kalamu, I think you graduated from St. Aug, I believe, around '64, going straight into Freedom Summer, and then after a little bit of time in the military, you were in college as well, and then from there, the Black Arts movement starts to really take off. And as I think about your work and contemplate the many features of your career, I think so much about the Black Arts movement. Can you speak a little bit about? I've always been very curious about this. Was your discovery of the Black Arts movement something that happened very suddenly, or was it something in the air that just gradually accumulated into a kind of life mission? Can you talk about your early encounters with Black Arts, say 65, 6, 7, 8 there? Was it when you came back here with the Free Southern Theater, or was it already on your mind before you got back here?
The movement, I would say somewhere around 62, 63, I was an activist.
Okay.
And what was happening was that there was a lot of demonstrations and what have you going on. And so I became involved in that. At the time, I did not see a connection between political activism and writing. I just didn't see it. So to answer your question directly, there's no simple answer. When I was in 8th grade at Rivers Frederick Junior High School, Mrs. Nelson's English class, she got us to do the school newspaper. And we submitted the school newspaper to a contest held by Columbia University in New York City, and we won a second place prize. Well, that is one of the things that really got me, because here we were, a little school in the bottom of the Mississippi River in New Orleans, and we won a second place prize from Columbia University. So you couldn't tell, we thought we was something, the whole group of us. The other thing that as I said, I was an activist. Rivers Frederick Junior High School was my 7th, 8th, and 9th grade year. And then I was sent to St. Augustine. And I say I didn't go, I mean that it wasn't my choice. I wanted to go to 35, McDonald 35, along with my classmates from Rivers Frederick. But my brother, well, I got to go back a bit. My cousin is Sherman Copeland, and he was a big man on campus at St. Augustine and then at Dillard. My brothers both decided to go to St. Augustine. And even though they were younger than me, what happened was I was the one who stayed at Rivers Frederick for the 3 years. The brother underneath me, he went to St. Aug. And the brother underneath him, Dr. Keith C. Ferdinand, tested into the first 7th grade they had at St. Aug. So the priest convinced my parents that it would cost almost the same for 3 as it would for 2. My younger brothers had already, they made their decision. They were going to St. Aug. I wanted to go to 35. And when the priest did that, that's how I got to St. Augustine High School. But during that time, I was also active in the civil rights movement. And in 11th grade was the first time I got arrested for sitting in at the Woolworths that was then located on Canal and Rampart. That building has since been torn down. But Aretha Castle Haley organized that demonstration. She was with CORE. And we also demonstrated at the Schwagman's lunch counter in Gentilly, because the Schwagman store on what's that, St. Claude did not have a big lunch counter or anything, but the Gentilly store did. So we did those demonstrations there. And of course, you know, that's my introduction to the American justice system, in which I'm have been at various times caught up in, and at other times I charged ahead and confronted that system. So that gives you a bit about my background. And as a writer, I would say that the civil rights movement was how I got involved. And then after I graduated high school in '64 and was had a scholarship to go to Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, which is, for those who are geographically challenged, as I was, I didn't realize at the time. All I knew was they had got this scholarship at St. Aug and to someplace Northfield, Minnesota. First time I went up there, I went by train. And, we took the train, a long train ride. And I had an uncle who lived in Chicago who would pass through there and so forth and so on. Well, I did not last long at Carleton. I believe 2 trimesters. They were on a trimester system, and ended up returning to New Orleans. And at the time when I returned, my mother was very concerned. She told me that they were going to come and get me. And I knew who they was. She was referring to the powers that be, as we would say it. But it was the federal government specifically. And I don't remember ever being discouraged from confronting them and doing the things that we did. But she was very concerned that they were going to come and get me. So I signed up for 3 years. There's a story behind that. I won't go into that at this time. But in high school, we were active in the civil rights movement. We did a lot of the picketing of Canal Street and so forth. And after the civil rights movement, I got into the U.S. Army. And while I was in the Army, I subscribed to, the Village Voice newspaper out of New York, and a magazine that was edited, or I think owned also, by Dan Watts, called Liberator magazine. And I did a lot of reading and what have you. And then I came out of the Army in '68. And when I came out of the Army, I joined the Free Southern Theater. My girlfriend at the time had told me there were 3 theater groups in New Orleans at that time. One was the Free Southern Theater, the other was Dashiki Theater, and a third was the Nat Turner Theater. And I checked out all three of them, and I decided she was right. The Free Southern Theater would be the one, and that's where I met Tom Dent, and the quote unquote the rest is history.
And that I imagine with once you meet Tom Dent and the ideas of the Black Arts Movement were swirling all around the work of the Free Southern Theater, and were moving rapidly all across Black America by 68, 69, I'm sure. And then, of course, you're involved in a lot of writers' workshops and writers' groups, founding the journal Nakumbo, and having that heavy involvement that goes for years and years with tutoring programs and the writing workshops. And somewhere along the way, in conversation with Sonia Sanchez, she started talking to you about haiku, and you produced quite a volume of haiku, and that's in fact what we're celebrating here today. Can we talk about your conversations with Sonia Sanchez and the particular pleasure and power that you're finding in the haiku form?
Okay, it's not most stories are not straight, even though they are told as though they were straight stories. And that's been the history of people that wrote, of historians. They tell a straight story, but most stories are not straight. When I came out of the Army in '68 and met Tom, it was like an older brother I never had. And he and I just hit it off so well, and we did a lot of things together. We traveled all over the South, particularly, I would say, from East Texas over to Alabama. But I can remember we took trips to Florida, to Miami, Florida, to Ohio, to the East Coast, to the Carolinas, and what have you. And I was active all this time. I'm active in the civil rights movement. That was really what consumed a lot of my time. And Tom encouraged it. And so I did not have, I was not single-minded about literature. So we were very active in the civil rights movement. I want to make that clear, because that has shaped how I view literature now. That's what shaped me in terms of literature. So part of what we were doing, you may have heard of an organization called the Congress of African People. Amiri Baraka and Maulana Karanga and a bunch of other people started it. And Michael Samanga Pele at the time, I knew him, and I'm gonna come back to that, to Samanga in a minute. But we were very, very active. I attended the 6th Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. I was traveling quite a bit, and that became a lifelong obsession with me. Initially, I served in the Army doing electronic missile maintenance in South Korea on a mountaintop about 50 miles from the DMZ. And so I was familiar with nuclear energy and stuff like that. I worked in the Army in that. And when I came out of the Army, we organized demonstrations about around nuclear energy and different things. Because I had that background, I knew the technology at that time very well. So when Tom and I hit it off together, that's when Nakumbo was started. We started in December of 1968. The first issue was called Echoes from the Gumbo. And I had looked up what was the derivation of gumbo. Now, a lot of people don't know that part of the derivation, not the total, but part of it, gumbo is of West African origin, but it also had an origin here in the United States. And that was the food of the Maroons who ran off into the swamps. And what they did was that was food that they could prepare in one pot. And today that's the way you prepare the food. And it had an ingredient that most of us today know as filet gumbo. And the filet was actually the sassafras leaves that were crushed up and added to the quote unquote the soup that became gumbo as a preservative. So they the food was in one pot. One person could carry the pot and use the filet as a preservative. Well, I read and found out about that. And that's how echoes from the gumbo became in gumbo. That involved the use of the African language and also the research I'd done about how that developed, how that food developed. So again, I would say that my work as a literary person was based in the civil rights movement and based in my understanding of our African heritage. And so, you put all that together and that gives you somebody like Kalamu Salaam.
There you go. And it's the Black Arts movement and again the movement. Go ahead.
No, you asking about Sonia Sanchez. So that was the background out of which I met Sonia Sanchez. Tom encouraged me to keep reading and to meet a lot of people. So through Tom Dent, I met Marcus Christian before he died. Through Tom Dent, I met Kamal Brathwaite, who was originally from Barbados and taught for a long time in Jamaica at Mona University. And through Tom, I met so many people, including Danny Barker. And Danny he was great because, well, not because, but one of the things, just one quick story about Danny. We would go over to Danny's house and sit initially in the front room, but then in the kitchen, we'd sit down and talk with Danny. Tom and I would talking to Danny and Lulu Barker, who was Danny's wife. And Danny invited me into his back room and shared with me. He said, "You see these shoes here? That's Bojangles' shoes." And he saw this and see that. And Danny, what many people don't know, Danny wrote a great deal. He was a writer, and he wrote about life coming up in New Orleans and the things he knew about working people on the riverfront and what have you. So Sonia was one of the people I became involved with as a result of activism. That's how we met. There were programs at one time. Dillard was doing Black Arts festivals, and they had Haki came down one time. I met him. This must have been. It was right after I came back, so I would say it was 69, 70 at that time period. And Sonia, in particular, was we became very good friends. In fact, she spent almost 2 weeks living with us at one point because she was on the move. And this is going into a whole lot of history of the San Francisco State and all that stuff. I don't want to get into that right now. But, so she spent that time. And of course, because she spent that time living with us, and we were living in the Ninth Ward at that point, and we had a community organization. We were doing community work, inviting scholars and activists down here, including John Henry Clark, Haki, Amiri Barak, and so that's how I got to know Amiri and so forth and so on. And so we would. It wasn't quote unquote a big thing. When you say like Sonia Sanchez, at that point in life, we didn't have, there was no internet, there were no cell phones. Used to be the telephone. You had to wait until after 10 o'clock at night because they charged a different amount to use the phone after 10, long distance calls and what have you. All those kinds of things people don't realize now because they just pick up a phone and use it. But it used to cost you. You wait till 10 o'clock to make, because it was so expensive to make a phone call during the day, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it was during this time period that Sonia and I became close. And I, as a writer, skipping stuff, as a writer, I became the editor of the Black Collegian magazine somewhere around 70, 71. And so I got to talk to a lot of different people, both here in New Orleans and around the country. And Sonia was one of the people whom I interviewed and we wrote stories about. And one of her anthologies that she edited, We Be Word Sorcerers, she used one of my stories in that. And that was one of my first national publications. Was with Sonia Sanchez. So you mentioned Sonia. We go way, way back together on those things.
And she got you writing haiku, is that right?
Yes and no.
Okay.
She was one of two people who really captured my imagination by the use of haiku. But the first one was Richard Wright. Many people don't know that in the last 2 years of his life, he wrote a tremendous amount of haiku and other short poems. There's a book out that's available now, Richard Wright and Haiku, I think it's called. Richard Wright Haiku or something like that. But it's got must be well over 300 of his haiku. So he was the first writer that really captured my attention in terms of writing haiku. I never met him, but that was early on I was writing. And then Sonia became the second writer, or you might call one of my contemporaries of that era, who was an influence in terms of haiku. Although haiku, the writing of haiku was just part of what I did as a writer. I never saw it as a big thing. And in fact, the book that's out now, Precise Tenderness, that book was written for the most part before Katrina was completed. There were a couple of pieces in the book, a couple of sections after Katrina. There's a section called Stone Sun Songs that there were about 4 or 5 pieces that were done after the visit to Ghana. There's a section of the New Orleans poetry. I did 14 poems. This was done in around 1999, when with the turn of the century, Essence magazine celebrated that, and I was asked to participate in that, and I said, okay, I will do some poems. And so I wrote about, as I said, about 14 poems in that section, and they chose to print, I think, five or six of the poems as part of Essence celebration of the turn of the century in 1999 to 2000. So that I feel like I'm rambling. Go ahead, ask a question.
That's all right. I was going to call. Would you like to read a few haiku from the new book, or would you like to take some questions from the audience? You have a preference? Would you like to read some from the book or questions from the audience?
Hear the questions from the audience, and if we have time, I'll gladly read something. But I prefer to relate to people rather than do stuff in the abstract.
That sounds great. I got you. In terms of sound, it may be that if you guys want to ask a question, maybe the Kalamu will be able to hear it just fine through the tech here. But if not, I can relay it sitting right here, or you can come up and take my chair and speak close by, whatever.
Let's pull a chair next to you.
From, yes. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. There we go.
So Kalamu,
Hey, what's
my
happening?
question, can you hear me, Kalamu?
I hear you talking,
Can you hear
Ashley.
What's up?
You are. Ashley.
Is your process with writing haiku? What?
No, I was just going to say.
You hear me?
I hear you well. I was just going to say that Ashley was one of the first students I taught in high school. And what had happened was, when I was asked to do this class, Ashley was at McDonald 35. And that summer, the summer before, I believe it was the summer before you went to 35, right? Ashley?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
She was in a workshop that I did, a writing workshop. And Ashley and I believe she'd been following me. Her daddy, I got along well with her daddy, you know, and they used to live out in Wagman, Louisiana, which is a little ways out from New Orleans. And after the programs, I would take her home, because sometimes we'd be doing programs all kinds. And her father and I, it was just one of those things. We kind of just hit it off. And one time I was talking to Ashley recently, and I asked her a question, and her father asked her the same question at the same time, unbeknownst to me. You know, it was just like that, you know. So anyway, Ashley and I worked with a program called Students at the Center. And that was a program that Jim Randles and myself were the primary teachers with that program. She was at 35, and I had been involved in doing a lot of things. I didn't talk about the photography, getting involved in photography in the 7th grade that much, but the photography morphed into video work. And when I met Ashley, that summer, right after that first school year, is when we started doing, I started teaching at 35, teaching the video and what have you. And we made one of the big movies, which I always loved, was Baby Love. And Ashley was the star of Baby Love, but she was also, and I think this is part of my influence, which people don't think about, we didn't see ourselves as doing one thing. So in the movie, Baby Love, when she wasn't on screen, she was doing the camera work. And we made movies and everything else. So that's all I got to say. Go ahead.
So my question is, how's your process for writing haikus different than your process for writing other poems, other forms of poetry? Or is there a difference in your process and the way you approach writing haikus?
Yeah, which is what is distinctive about writing haikus. I did, my father, when he was in the Army, had a royal typewriter, portable royal typewriter, and it was passed on to me. And so I got really good at it, even though you just put one page in at a time. I got good at estimating how close I was to the end, writing and so forth and so on. But I didn't write any of the haikus like that. It was later in my life that I started writing haikus. And when I started writing haikus, what I found out was that it was difficult to write the haikus on a typewriter for me, because I would, work with the words and what have you, and the syllable counts. And I had little, when I did it by hand, there was a mark I used with the syllables so I could, count out the syllables and what have you. And I found it easier to do that all by hand, so that the haiku writing was different from all the other writing I did, the plays and the essays and the newspaper work and all that stuff. It was different because all of those other things I did on a typewriter, but the haiku I did by hand.
Other questions for Kalamu? Want to come up in the question asking seat, anybody? And pose a question to Kalamu, particularly about the new book or anything. Other questions for Kalamu? Anything at all?
I have a question. Kalamu, could you read some of the haikus?
I could, but I ain't right now. I'm waiting for questions. I will. Yes, ma'am. That's Vera. Now, there's a story behind that.
That's a question.
Yeah, we had an organization called Ahitiana, and Vera's mother was an organizer in the lower Ninth Ward. She grew up in the lower Ninth Ward also. And Vera decided, I believe you went to 35, didn't you, Vera?
I did.
Yeah, Vera decided that she wanted to sell books. And she used to sell books out of the trunk of her car. She would drive around the city selling books and what have you out of the trunk of her car. Vera had also been a part of the organization that we had in the lower Ninth Ward, Ahitiana, and her mother was an organizer in the lower nine, was a major community organizer. So that's how we got it involved in things. And so this bookstore, look out, Stan, man. This bookstore was, I've known about the bookstore before it was a bookstore. I'll put it that way, with Vera. Yeah, Stan, what you got to say, man?
How you doing?
I'm trying. Not good as you. I ain't got no stars on my head, but I'm hanging in there.
It's all in your heart and in your writing. So Tom Dent was a big influence on you.
Yeah.
What do you think his reception would be to your latest endeavor with these haikus?
Oh, he would enjoy it and tell me keep on doing it. Keep on doing it. And if I said, well, damn, Tom, I done wrote over 200 of them. He said, that's good. Keep on. That was Tom.
So when you were writing the Tom Dent Reader, did you ever run across any examples of haikus that Tom might have written?
No, I didn't. I didn't run into any. You ask about, that's an interesting thing. That book is the first book I did with UNO Press. Abram Himmelstein offered me the opportunity to do that book. And when I went up to Amistad Center, where Tom's papers were kept, is when I discovered how much work Tom did, even though he and I had been close. I mean, we drove through the South together and all kinds of things. And whenever I went by his apartment, he would be writing and what have you. I still had no concrete idea of how much work he did. There's a 6-foot steel cabinet at Amistad, with the shelves and everything, just full of Tom's work. He didn't publish that much, but he wrote every day. I mean, he really worked at it. And he was the inspiration for me while he was living. And then when I subsequently did the research on him, he was a bigger inspiration to me because I saw how much work he did.
Well, I tell you what, you in your own right have established yourself as a writer, but I think there's a legacy that Tom has set for a lot of writers in the city, and you're probably one of the best practitioners of his writing and being so prolific. And Abram just left out, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that TR has done just an outstanding job on the book that he's done on literary writers here in the city. And I want to make sure to give him his kudos, like I'm giving you kudos while you're here with us. So TR has done an outstanding job, and that's the Blue Collar Scholars take on it, and I'm out.
Okay. Ashe.
I'm a local tour guide in the city.
Uh-huh.
Actually known as New Orleans Nate Scott. And when I do a music tour, a lot of folks get excited when I tell them both a good friend of mine by the name of Fats Domino and I lived on the same street as well and went to the same elementary school. I heard you mention that you went to McCarty as well. And my question is, what year was that?
McCarty was backing up 64, 63, 60, must have been 61.
Yeah, you were there maybe 2 years before me.
And I was only at McCarty for about 2 or 3 days. What had happened was when I was going to McCarty, I had a bout of appendicitis and was in the hospital up at Flint Goodrich. And when I came out of the hospital, my parents, as I was saying about my younger brothers wanting to go to St. Aug, well, they had received, they had been after me about, deciding what school to go to and everything else like that. And McCarty was in the lower ninth ward, but because my mother was a school teacher, she could get access to someone to sponsor me at any of the schools, at the time in New Orleans. And I ended up at Rivers Frederick, and that was the defining aspect of my life. In fact, now that you mention this, coming out of the lower nine, I get to Rivers Frederick, and I was really, really impressed with the teachers at the school there. There's a teacher I had who taught history, Mrs. Green. I'm willing to bet every penny I don't have and borrow some money and put it down that she was a follower of Marcus Garvey. So while all the other schools, they used to have the spring festivals, and you had to do these different programs and ever, she would have us doing programs that were straight out political stuff. I remember one year we did a program, and my big line, we used to, on the stage at Rivers Frederick, I've jumped from behind the curtain, and my big line was they had a sword that was fashioned out of a coat hanger with a cardboard thing for the handle. And I jump out there and say, I'm a desperate black man who's willing to fight and die for my freedom. Well, you know, they wasn't doing that at my other school. They wasn't doing that. So that's what I came through that. And after that, after Rivers Frederick, that's why I was saying I was sent to St. Aug. I get to St. Aug, and I wanted to check out the drama club. I was thinking we're going to do plays like that. Man, they were doing these drawing room dramas with fake British accents and all that kind of shit. And I said, this ain't for nothing, you know, compared to I am a desperate black man who's willing to fight and die for my freedom. And at that point, I realized there was a major distinction between educators who were activists and educators whose goal was to prepare you to be a part of the system.
And you may have even been at Dashiki during the time my wife was there.
I was not at Dashiki Theater. I was with Free Southern Theater. I used to go to their productions.
I misunderstood you then.
Yeah, no, I was. There were 3 theater companies when I came up in New Orleans: Dashiki Theater, Free Southern Theater, and the Nat Turner Theater. And my girlfriend at the time, Thelma Thomas, told me, she wrote and told me, I was in the Army, that, you know, I think you should go to the Free Southern Theater. And when I got home, of course, I checked out all 3 of them. And Dashiki was uptown. I had, you know, I mean, you can't come out of the lower Ninth Ward at that time period and love uptown New Orleans. That just wasn't happening, you know. And so I ended up going with Free Southern Theater. In fact, Free Southern Theater's building was on Lawsett and Louisa, right on the corner. It was an old building that had been a cleaner's, and the door, it sat like cat-a-corner. The door opening was cat-a-corner on the corner there of Lawsett and Louisa, and a brother from Nigeria had painted the door green. Was it green and black? Yeah, green and black, or yellow and black. I don't remember. But he had painted it with like a big African mask on the corner there. And of course, Dashiki was partially sponsored by the priest from the Catholic Church. And the Nat Turner Theater was a writer by the name of Charles Self. And they didn't have a place per se, but it was interesting that Charles Self, well, the Nat Turner Theater, one of the principals in that theater was Viola Calhoun, and I'm still good friends with her younger brother and his wife. That's Keith Calhoun and Chandra McCormick. I know them. And the Dashiki Theater Company, I became very good friends with Norbert Davison, who was the resident writer for Dashiki. And then through my association with Free Southern Theater, Tom Dent was the man that really, really influenced me.
Okay, Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All righty.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, man, yeah, they must be pulling people in and off the street. Now,
Yeah, I just walked in. I was in the area, so I just wanted to stop by and holler at you.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So I got, just for the purpose of introducing people, I got relatives all over the place, and it's like New Orleans. You got to be careful what you say, because you never know. You could be in the presence of one of your family members and what have you. So go ahead, come out, say what you got to say.
Well, I was just going to ask a question about the haiku, and this is my uncle, by the way. That's what he's talking about. Yeah. So the question about the haiku and the form of the haiku in relation to the messaging and the content that you're trying to deliver. Do you find that what's the difference between maybe different forms of? It was similar to the question the sister asked before. Is it effective medium or effective form for delivering the content you want, as opposed to maybe other styles that you may use or may have normally or previously used?
I'm gonna give you a left-handed answer, and it's a left-handed answer because in order to fully appreciate it, you gotta. If you don't know anything about our history and our music, it's not gonna make full sense to you. But
Right.
I never was interested in other literary forms, in doing other literary forms per se. It was the other way around. I had an interest. As I was saying before, I was an activist, and I like to read, but I had an interest in trying to figure out how to make these things work in for what might be called the Black aesthetic. And I learned that from the musicians, because a lot of the musicians were not only skilled at being a musician, they could have done anything. They could have done classical music. They could have, done Broadway plays, and so forth and so on. But they chose to do jazz. Like Kid Jordan learned how to read, came out of Crowley, Louisiana, went to Southern in Baton Rouge, but eventually came down here and was his, trying to get it straight, I think his wife was close to Alvin Baptiste's wife. So but all I'm saying is all these musicians were together. But one of the things about them is they had this background. Many of them were quote unquote formally educated, but they chose jazz as their way of doing things. And as a jazz musician, they figured out how to make music in their own way. And they weren't trying to be classical musicians. They weren't even trying to be pop musicians, because we have a lot of, pop musicians coming out of here, but I won't get into that. But they were trying to do, so the jazz aesthetic is what I was interested in. That is, you had to really practice and learn your chosen instrument. In my case, it was the pen, but you had to do it in your own way. That's what was encouraged by the jazz.
Right.
So they didn't want to hear you play, as Ellis Marcellus would say, if I wanted to hear that, I would listen to that. What you got to say? And that's where I came from. And so the haiku, at the back of the book, there's a little short essay I did about how I write haiku. And I talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I know you're more expressive, or I won't say more, but you're used to hearing the expressive, the jazz, the bebop, and in your sound. So
Yeah.
that contrast was a bit interesting. All right, I'm out of here.
All right.
All right.
Anybody else?
Come out.
Yeah.
How's Laini and Asalia?
Good. Actually, I'm about to go. Ashley's doing a presentation right now for her follow-up class. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm about to head out there and do that. But they're doing well. They're doing very well. We're gonna come holler at y'all together though.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
In a minute.
Anybody else want to take a moment in the question chair for Kalamu? Anything else? Kalamu, oh, what's that, honey? Sure. Yeah, I've got one more, Kalamu.
It's me again. I just like talk a little bit about the artwork, like who's the artist, how did y'all collaborate and decide that this was going to be, this is such a beautiful image. I'm curious as to how you selected this image.
Well, as a story, as I was saying, with Black folk, ain't nothing a straight line. You know, there's a story. The story is this. When I was talking with, and I mentioned his name, Michael Samanga, and Samanga was at Third World Press. And of course, I've known Aki for a long time. So Samanga said to me, man, would you be interested in doing another book with Third World Press? They're the ones that I had two major books with them, What is Life, and then Magic of Juju. And I said, yeah, okay, we can do something. Long story short, Samanga and Haki had a falling out. So Samanga was no longer at Third World Press. Haki called me and told me he still wanted to do a book, that poetry book that you had that Samanga was going to do. I said, fine, we'll do it. So Precise Tenderness is on Third World Press. The cover, howsoever, was Samanga's hookup with the artist, and Samanga's in Atlanta. So after the book came out, I was so impressed by it. I called Samanga and asked him for the contact on the artist who did the cover, because I didn't know the artist. And he, of course, when he was about to do the book, he showed me the cover, and we exchanged it on the computer, and I liked it. But I got her number from Samanga, and I called her, and we had a conversation. And I just think that that's part of the reason there's even an interest in the book, is because it's got a beautiful cover. And the other part is that it looked like when you flip through it, it looked like you could stand there and read most of it right quick, because it was haiku. So those were the two things that people responded to. Even right now, just you holding it in your hand, it's attractive. It catches people's eye, And then we don't like to read that much, our people, me included, even though I'm considered by many intellectual. Still, I understand that having short things to read that you can flip through and just get something right quick makes a big impression on people. Makes a big impression. So yeah, that's where that came from. And the work she did, Tracy did, it's incredible. That's an incredible piece. And it was not planned. That cover was not planned for Kalamu's new book of poetry. She was working on some stuff, and she did an image for a contest or something like that. But it picked up and used, and it was in fact used in a program in Germany. And then it got to Samanga. He found out about it and so forth and so on.
Okay, and her name is Tracy
Morel. It's in the
Morel.
front. Yeah. And in fact, It's in the, no, on the second title page. You see at the bottom.
Yes, yes, I see. Okay.
All right. And just since you bring it up, you have this way of getting me to talk about stuff I wouldn't normally talk about, but I decided, partially on the strength of Trace's artwork, that I was going to post a poem a day for 100 days. And I started on my birthday, March 24th, and I've been posting a poem a day along with the cover of the book. And you know, it's just something to do.
We appreciate the poems of the day. I read it every day.
Yeah.
All right, Kalamu, peace out.
All right, peace.
Kalamu, thank you so much for doing this, and congratulations on the beautiful new book. Everybody, if you haven't picked up a copy of Kalamu's new book, they've got it here, signed copies. There's still a few left. And Kalamu, once again, thank you for spending some time with us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Before we leave out of here, I must say something about your book, because in fact, let me see. I got a copy of it here somewhere. Where is that? Oh, it's on the other bookshelf. I don't want to get up right now and go get it, but there are only a few books that I would recommend about New Orleans. And your book is one of them. And one of the reasons for that is because you put a lot of time into doing the research on New Orleans and on not New Orleans in the abstract or just historically, but putting it all together. And it was in your book that I found out that although I had met Marcus Christian and was a fan of his writings, had gone through Tom, had met him, and had gone up to the University of New Orleans and sat in the Earl K. Long Library and went through the boxes of his work. It was only through your book that I found out that the street I grew up on, Marcus Christian lived on that street about 12 blocks away on St. Maurice. I didn't know that. And that was, even though I knew I had met Marcus Christian, I didn't know he grew up down the street from me.
Sure. Yeah. That's something else. Yeah. Well, go ahead, man.
Yeah, your book showed me that, and I said to myself, I need to read this because I wonder how much more don't I know. Sure. And like when you were talking about what the in the French Quarter, that building, the
Pontable, yeah, Pontable.
The Pontable, the one that's been in the news now with the mayor.
Oh yeah.
It has a history.
Oh yeah.
And a pretty distinctive history. So you did that. You did that kind of work. I mean, that level of work, and it hadn't been done. Right. I mean, there's a lot of books about New Orleans, the French Quarter, this and that, and so forth and so on. But most of them have not been done with an eye towards what makes us distinctive. And it's not just food, music, and architecture.
Right on.
I really appreciated that about your book.
I appreciate you saying that, man. It means so much to me to hear you saying you enjoyed it and gained from it. I put a lot of work into it, and it just came out about 6 weeks ago, and I've been watching it make its way in the world a little bit, and it's very exciting to get that testimony from you, man.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting that it's not every day that I learned something about Marcus Christian that I didn't know.
There you go, man. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, my friend. It's such a delight to be with you, even virtually. And so grateful for your time and excited to keep learning more about your work and all the things you've done.
Right. Well, we got a bunch of stuff coming.
I can't wait for more, man. The photography
yeah.
book is coming and
Yeah.
more stuff on that.
Yeah, there's the next book coming out is In Love and Struggle. It's a collection of short fiction. And the cover is done by my daughter, Kiini, who lives in New York City. And she's a writer also, and has done quite a bit of work. And she did the cover, she did the forward, and at the end of the book, there's a conversation between she and myself, because I'm just totally proud of her. And she has a life all of her own now. I mean, you know, she doesn't go around telling about I'm so and so's daughter. No, she's really made her mark. You know.
Right on. Well, maybe when there's some of these new books come out, you know, in the fall or beyond that, you know, come on my radio show. We can talk there.
Sure.
And contact my radio or any way you want to do it, man. It's
Well,
a pleasure and honor to have with you.
Yeah, I said I was going to read something from the book, from the collection. So I'll conclude with, let's see. Well, I can conclude with two poems. One is the first poem of the book, haiku number 1. And I must say this is not necessarily the order the poems were written in, although they are numbered like that. You might think that was the case. Some of them were written, you know, one behind the other, and some of them were like months between them, what have you. But haiku number 1, there's no night so long that we cannot ride through to taste tomorrow's dawn.
Love that. Yeah.
And that has to do, a lot of that has to do with, what can I call it? Well, if you read the book, at the back of the book, I got an essay about how I write haiku and what all of that is about. Now let's see, page 78, 79. Hold on, that's poem 78. Oh, I see how this is. I'm gonna read two more. One is haiku number 79. Used to do, when I was performing a lot, this was a time that in the turn of the century, there was a period where there was a big interest in Black erotica. And I said, I thought I wanted to do some stuff to deal with eroticism, but to deal with it from a different perspective. And I had the idea that the church was very close in terms of spiritualism, particularly the Black church and the way we did church, to eroticism. So people might not see it at first. And I did this poem, number 79. I enter your church. You receive my offerings. Screaming choirs merge. And that grew out of that. And this last one is not last one, but in the book, but number 78. This is from my philosophy of life. Life is a knowing leap into the unknown, a dive to certain death.
All right. Yeah. Man. Thank you again, Kalamu. Congratulations on the beautiful new book. We're looking forward to the next ones too.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Sergio.